We have Donna Lichaw here tonight, and very excited. Met Donna a couple of years ago over lunch. We were both teaching at NYU at the time, and she's gone on to be a big-time author and traveling the world talking about storytelling and UX. We're really happy to have her here today. So let's get a round of applause for Donna.
So I'm here to talk to you tonight about data, storytelling, and user experience. And for me, this all starts many years ago. I was in film school. This is around 2004. And I was presenting my year-end project to a pretty big audience. It was the biggest audience I'd ever presented to, and I was super excited for everyone to see this movie that I was showing them. I'd worked so hard on it, and I couldn't wait for them to see it. I knew they were gonna love it. And so there I am in a dark auditorium, and sitting in the front row. My palms are sweaty, and the film ends, lights go up, I jump on stage. I'm supposed to take questions and comments. And before the lights could even finish going up, one of my classmates, his hand shoots up. And the first words out of his mouth, I'll never forget these words, they've been etched into my brain. "I can't believe you made us sit through that." So this film that I thought was so amazing, people hated it. It started, a bunch of stuff happened, and then it ended. I somehow that year forgot one of the foundational tenets of filmmaking, which is if you want to engage an audience with your film, you have to have a story at your foundation. And story is not about flashy images and gorgeously shot scenes. It's not about a well-researched, in this case it was a documentary. It doesn't matter how good your research is, how good your concept is, how perfect and meticulous your editing is. Story is something else. That's what I'll dig into in a moment. Software, websites, apps, services, products. I'm just going to call them products for short. Things that we build, put out into the world. Products have a lot in common with a film. If you want to engage your audience with your product, you have to have a story at your foundation. Now, you can lay this story down by accident, like I had done with a lot of my films. At the point I was in grad school, I'd won some awards, and I had put out some really great work, and I had a lot of pretty bad work. I never really thought much of why some were successful and others just completely disengaged people. You could do this by accident, like I did for years working in technology. I've now been working in tech for almost 20 years, for over 20 years at this point. And you probably, a lot of you are laying this foundation of story without realizing it. You can lay this foundation with meticulous care and intent, like this person here. Does anyone know who this is? If you've read my book, you can't answer this question. Anyone who has not read my book know who this is? Who said it first? You said it first. Okay. You get a copy of my new book, The User's Journey. I'm going to pass it back. And if anyone wants to take a look at it, raise your hand. For those of you who can't see, if any of you want to take a look at the book tonight, just, say, give me the book, and feel free to flip through it. I'll also have a discount code for you to buy the book at the end of the night, so you can all get copies in other ways as well. But so, right, this is the creator of Breaking Bad, Vince Gilligan. And what he's seated in front of is a story map of season 4 of Breaking Bad. What TV writers do is they externalize their work. So first thing they do, they don't jump to a laptop and say, I'm going to write a script. I have an idea for a thing. This is going to be great. Right? They externalize, ideally with an entire team of writers. They map everything out that's going to happen in the world of that story. Every scene, episode, season, as big as you can get. Now, the reason they do this, one, it's external, and there's a lot of science behind the brain externalizing that helps us be more creative and more fluid with our work. We see when things do work and don't work. Two, they can do this collectively in a shared way where they all own the story. And when I say they, this is writers, but then it extends even farther out onto the rest of the cast. And mapping the story in this way helps them also do this. This is a story card from near the end of season 4 of Breaking Bad. And if you've seen Breaking Bad, you know what this refers to. I don't need to tell you. If you haven't seen Breaking Bad, then that you have to go home, and this weekend you're going to stay home all weekend and watch it. What mapping the story does for TV writers is it helps them make things go boom. This might be on screen, if that's part of the strategic vision of what something is. And more importantly, it's making things go boom for the viewers, the receivers on the other end. Now, to understand how this works for products, and then of course how data fits into it, first need to understand how story works. So first, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This timeline then has a structure on it. We call this the narrative arc. And on that arc, we have plot points. Now, I'm going to use one of my favorite movies to illustrate the mechanics of this. Has anyone not seen, or has anyone not seen Back to the Future? I always do it. Whoa, three people? Anyone over here? I'm curious. 3 people. That's statistically the highest number of people in an audience that has ever not seen. So 3 of you have homework, extra homework. So we're gonna have a few spoilers, but it's okay. You're still gonna love it. It's a great movie. So at the beginning, we're introduced to a hero, and they have some kind of a big goal. So we're introduced to Marty, and he wants to make something of himself. His parents, his family, they're kind of losers, and he wants to do things like he loves this truck, and he has a girlfriend, wants to go on vacation, and he just wants cool things. So luckily he's got this friend, Doc, and they have a time machine. All is good in the world until something goes wrong. We call this the inciting incident, or the very technical term is a problem. A problem arises. So what happens here? Well, it turns out Doc stole energy to fuel the time machine, and then a bunch of people come out in a car and they shoot him, and things are suddenly not good. This kickstarts the action of the entire story. And so you have Marty jumping in a time machine, and he has to figure out what to do. Next thing you know, he's back in 1955. And this leads to what we call rising action. And all this means is that the y-axis here, that's tension or interestingness or awesomeness. Things just have to get better and better and better each step of the way. If it starts getting more boring at any point, you've lost everyone's attention and you've failed. So failed to engage. Or if you're like me, a student, you fail your project. But it has to get more and more interesting. So in this case, he meets his mom, and his mom has a crush on him, and things get wackier and wackier. What happens here, the neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists tell us that at the point that we're engaged in the action of a film, one, we identify with the hero, whether we like them or not, we identify with them as if we're experiencing the story that we're seeing play out. So our palms get sweaty at the right points, our pulse quickens, we're there, we're in the action. And so, it brings us along a journey as things get crazier and crazier, weirder and weirder, or more mysterious, whatever the vision of that story is, until the point that we're so invested that something very, very, very wrong happens. This is the point of no return. This is very close to the end of the movie where in the case of Back to the Future, he's so close to figuring out how to get back to the future, which I figured out is why the movie is called Back to the Future. He figured out how to power the time machine, but suddenly he's on stage playing Johnny B. Good, and he starts disappearing, and he has to get his parents to meet, otherwise he'll never be born, and things just get crazy and crazy. This moment of crisis, it is there to give us that ultimate satisfaction when the hero overcomes this very last hurdle. If they don't overcome it, it's a tragedy. And luckily in our line of work, we're not in the business of building tragedies. for anyone, for users or our businesses or ourselves. So they have to overcome this. If for any reason we don't find out what happens, that then becomes a cliffhanger, and we fall off the cliff, and we want to know what's going to happen next. So in Back to the Future, how does he overcome this? Well, this moment is what we call the climax, or sometimes it's called the resolution. Climax because it's the highest point in the story. So this is when the action is when there are explosions and fireworks. In this case, there's lightning. And it's called a resolution also because that problem that arose early on in the story, that is resolved. So in this case, they figure out how to power the time machine, get Marty back into time, but then what? So at this point in the story, you always have to ask, then what? How does it end? This is another psychological phenomenon where we as humans need closure. Otherwise, we're very frustrated. The credits, if they just started rolling right then, the lightning, and he's back in time, we would be very, very, very frustrated. So this leads to what we call falling action, or denouement. Denouement is a fancy French word for it, and it means literally unraveling or unknotting. So this is when tension eases and we come to a close. It's important to note also that this y-axis, it's not good or bad. It's just exciting, and then it calms down. Story comes to a close. So in this case, Marty's back in the future, and he's back home. Often journeys end up with a hero, starting at home and then coming full circle, going back home. In this case, as with all stories, the hero should have grown and they should be better by the end of the story, and home often is better at the end of the story. In this case, it's a lot better. Biff is their manservant, and like Marty has his parents are like all cool, and his dad's a published author, and his girlfriend like takes him out, and he's got this truck that he always wanted, and things are pretty good. They embrace, and this leads us to the end of the story. Now, if this was a traditional Hollywood movie, this would be the end. The credits would roll, and we'd be all happy. But because there's a little twist here, what then happens is Doc comes out, and Marty, you have to come with me. Where? To the future. And what this does is kickstarts the next episode in what will be the next journey that happens. And this is how we go from single serve stories to episodic stories that continue on and on, sometimes indefinitely. So this is how story functions for a movie. What about the types of things the projects we work on, the types of things that we build, especially digital, but this really applies to anything, honestly. So I want you to look at this photograph here. And this question I'm just going to put out to all of you. If I were to tell you that these two people are using an app that comes pre-installed on every iPhone, yell it out. What are they using? One person said iTunes. Who was that? YouTube. Okay. No one's wants. I was going to say iTunes. It's as funny as Siri, but I know. Okay. So stock ticker. Yeah. I just got a new iPhone last week. I forgot that app exists until it was on my new phone. And yes. So most of you said FaceTime. And it took you split seconds to compute it. What's going on when you look at that photograph? Well, what happens when you look at a photograph is your brain jumps into story computing mode. The technical term for this is narrative parsing. And your brain looks at these two people and says, well, maybe they're a little older. They have a phone, and it's in landscape, and Apple iPhone, I know it has FaceTime on it, and they're, maybe they want to see their grandkids, they miss their grandkids. Look at them, they're so happy. They're probably talking to their grandkids. Your brain takes split seconds to compute a narrative, and that narrative has structure. Narrative is how we give meaning to everything. It's such a powerful computing function that if you don't have the ability to compute narrative, it's a dysfunction actually called dysnarrativia, and it's as debilitating as amnesia. You cannot function in the world. So narrative governs how we understand something as quickly as just scanning a photograph. You don't have to sit through a 2-hour long movie. Now, what neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists also tell us is that if you were these two people thinking about using FaceTime, so thinking about FaceTime as a product, or then using FaceTime, life is a story. And in that story, you are the hero. And that is essential. So we are all the heroes of our own stories. And we're doing this computing every single split second of every day as we do anything, as boring as walking down the street, or as boring or exciting, depending on how you look at it, as thinking about an app or using an app, thinking about a business, a brand, engaging with that business and brand. So how does story govern how we engage and think about, first, at the highest level, how we think about products? So first, there's always, at the beginning of a story, there's always, you always have to ask who is the hero and what is their big goal. Then you need to jump into, well, what is the problem? Why can't they otherwise meet their goal without your solution? Then there's a product name and a market category. I'll explain how this works in a second. And then there's always some kind of competition. There's always something that could get in the way of people thinking, I would love to try this out, or I would love to subscribe to that, or go do this thing. At the climax here, there's some kind of value proposition and competitive advantage. This is what gets people excited, thinking, ooh, FaceTime, I can do that, okay. And at the end, there's some kind of a takeaway. So from the business standpoint, this is when you need to ask, well, what do we want people to think? Oh, I could see myself using that, or I would like to try it out, or a whole bunch of other outcomes here that lead towards the user, in this case, their goal being met. But this is when we start getting actually into data collection mode and data analytics, which is that takeaway at the end and the goal met. It's not just the user takeaway and the user goal. This is when we start considering business goals. So what does the business want people to think? And it could be emotional, and it could be actually something that's at this point measurable, like conversion or trials or a whole host of other metrics and KPIs. And the goal met is something that users want that's lofty, which I'll show you in a second. And it could be something that meets a business's mission statement, so it could be really lofty, or again, it could be tangible. And it gets more tangible down the line, but let me show you how this operates in a product that you're all familiar with, the iPhone. Now, I use this as an example just because it's easy to refer back to, and you all either own an iPhone or you have a device that's very similar to it, a smartphone that's very similar to it. So the story that the iPhone could have been when it first came out was a lot of people owned mobile audio devices and owned mobile phones. And so we listened to music and made phone calls. Now, the problem, that the way a lot of us saw it, was that it sucked to carry two devices. It was clunky. And we thought, why doesn't Apple make an iPod that makes phone calls? Like, can't they just call it the iPhone? They were calling everything I this, I that at the time. So it could have been, iPhone, a smartphone. Essentially a two-in-one device. Now, what could get in the way of thinking that this is a good idea? Well, you might already own an iPod, you might own a mobile phone, there might be usability issues. Smartphones at the time, devices that did two-in-one, were terrible and really difficult to use, and might have been really expensive. iPods already were expensive. Everything else, why would you want to spend more money for another device? So in the end, that takeaway, it's a big question mark with a device with this story architecture. Would people have really wanted it? That goal of listening to music and making phone calls, how compelling was that really? Well, so if you look at this story structure from an architectural standpoint, what you see is that this is what we call anticlimactic. Literally, there is no climax. It's a known solution to a known problem. People want two-in-one device, they get a two-in-one device. It's a direct solution and it's linear. No impact there. So that's if you look at it architecturally. If you were to look at this story as a prototype, something that was actually built and modeled, it would have looked like this. This is a schematic that's in the US Patent Archive. And it's unclear if Apple ever actually really prototyped this device or if they submitted it to the patent for it as kind of an Easter egg joke, knowing that the public would see the schematics eventually. Apple's known for doing a lot of jokes like that. The general gist of how this works is, if you remember the old iPod with the click wheel, it's an iPod that makes phone calls. And to input numbers, you would go like that. All right, keep going. And letters, if you want to enter names, right, like that, and that, and that. And you have to precisely select your input. This device would have been more difficult to use than a rotary phone. So that, from a story perspective, is a different kind of model that we can assess it as. This is what we would call a cliffhanger. At the point of crisis, is it difficult to use? The answer would have been yes, like very, very, very yes. So that's not a device that a story-driven company like Apple, that's not a device that they would be able to put out to market. So what did they end up releasing? What was the story of the actual iPhone? It's something that you take up a couple of notches. So that goal of I want to tune one device, I want to listen to music, make phone calls, when you hear that kind of information from your customers, and so this is now when we start getting into qualitative data collection, right? If you do any kind of user research, you're attuned to your customers' needs, you go out, talk to them, and when they tell you things like that, there's a rule of thumb, which is you ask 5 whys. And by the time you ask the 5th why, you typically get down to the bottom of what they really need to do. And so in this case, this is a story, a high-level story about communication. People need to communicate with the world around them. Communication is 2 ways, the dictionary definition. It's outward and inward. So, okay, humans need to communicate. Great. What's the problem? 10 years ago, it was easier than ever to communicate. We had a million ways. It was pretty cool. So the problem, the way that Steve Jobs positioned it when he presented the iPhone in an hour-long keynote presentation to the world, is what he told everyone was that, great, smartphones suck. Now, the thing about smartphones at the time is they were a tiny sliver of the market. The top-selling phone that year was the Nokia brick phone that did nothing. It made phone calls. I think that was about all it did. It might have had Tetris, Snake, that's it, not Tetris, that was too complex, Snake. So no one wanted smartphones. So there he is telling everyone, smartphones suck. What he was trying to tell you, he was always a show person, and so what he was trying to say is, there's a better way to communicate. So the iPhone, it's a smartphone. Now what you see here is this story is building tension, because the world didn't want smartphones, and then there's Steve Jobs saying, smartphones suck, I have a smartphone for you. So as we build tension, the potential crises, it could be like, well, I don't want a smartphone. Again, those questions, is it difficult to use? I already own an iPod, I own a mobile phone, why would I want this device? So how did they construct the story, not just the story of how they sold the iPhone to the world, but the story that the product embodied as a device? Well, what it was, what the value that they promise is that this is the best way to communicate. It's something that works like magic, and it's not a 2-in-1 device, it's a 3-in-1 device. What Apple presented that year was an iPod, a mobile phone, and then this third thing that they called an internet communicator that honestly nobody except for super nerds wanted. I was happy with it. I had like a Palm Trio that did all this cool stuff, but no one wanted this thing called the internet communicator. That said, what ended up happening with a story like this, over time, and stories like this often take a lot of time to develop once an actual product goes into market and you start collecting real data and finding out, are people adopting this or not. But eventually, we all wanted a device like this. Not necessarily that we went out and bought the first iPhone, but now 10 years later, we all have a device just like this. Our grandparents have a device just like this that they use to call their grandkids with FaceTime. So the communication story, again, it's high level and it has that structural impact. Now, this story was so strong that You could tell it in an hour-long keynote presentation, or you could also communicate it in a quick Super Bowl ad. The Super Bowl ad that year for the iPhone had one word in it: hello. So stories, there are a lot of different ways to communicate stories. What matters is that the architecture is sound, but not everyone has to see that architecture and has to know what you're doing behind the surface. What story does to the ideas of products and how we think about them is it helps us communicate a shared strategic vision of what a product is, how we define it, and how we see it being valuable to anyone on the other end who needs to engage with it. Stories help us innovate and prioritize against that vision. So if you consider the iPhone, when it came out, it had the touch screen. And people were freaking out. They thought, like, why would Apple release a device with a touchscreen? Touchscreens at the time were horrific to use. There were phones that had them, and they were like, it was like inputting things with mittens on, and they all had like stylus pens, and they came in different colors, and this is not a mass market device. But what they needed to do in order to build something that had that architecture that worked like magic, it had to have a touchscreen. There was no way for it to otherwise work like magic. So the story is often how innovation happens. Now, the story also helps you align everything and everyone towards the vision of what something is. And here, alignment, I'm talking internally, I'm talking with your teammates, with executives, with investors, with anyone who, and your users, anyone you need to convince and make a compelling argument for why this thing is amazing. But also alignment in terms of features and functionality and content and anything that's going to go into production of this thing that you're building. There's a concept in filmmaking that's called mise en scène, which the idea is, it's literally French, putting in the scene. And the idea is that you don't put anything in the scene that doesn't support the story and move the story forward. If it does not move the story forward, and in film language and story language, moving the story forward means if it doesn't move the character, the main character, the hero forward, you take it out. You cut it, and it goes on, well, in the olden days, it would go on the cutting room floor. The film would, that's how I learned to edit. Like, you cut the film, and it was so exciting. Sometimes you burn it, and it's very cool. So you have to be ruthless when you're building these stories. Now, with a device like the iPhone, if you remember, and you probably don't because it doesn't matter anymore, but the original iPhone, it was missing key features. It baffled people. It didn't do things that every other smartphone did, like cut and paste, basic feature, undo, a basic feature, and install apps. You couldn't install games or apps. Every smartphone at the time did that. And what that meant is that what they saw, the story of the iPhone, undo, cut and paste, they were not part of a communication strategy. They didn't move this story of magic and the best way to communicate forward. If anything, a lot of people I work with and talk to these days don't even know that you can do cut and paste and undo on the iPhone. And so in the end, it helps you prioritize and essentially understand not just what a product is at the conceptual level, but how it can work. And so this story is something that flows through everything from, in this case, package design. That's a story. There's a whole genre on YouTube that's dedicated to unboxing, where people like flip out and they get so excited and, oh my God, I have this new device. And this story is then also something that's echoed in, if it's a digital product, in how people actually use it, and in screen interfaces and any kind of journeys, big and small. And so what we start getting into here is that story helps us envision the user's journey as a hero's journey. And in order to do that, we've got architecture that looks like this. First, you have to ask who is the hero and what is their big goal. Then, what is the problem? And this ideally is the problem that you already outlined conceptually earlier with that big picture story. What is maybe possibly the incentive or call to action? That term call to action, it's a term that we use a lot in the digital world. It comes from stories. It's that inciting incident. It's the thing that's going to call the hero to action. Sometimes it's a button. And that's compelling. It works. So again, these can be tiny. I'll show you in a second how this works, but tiny or really big. Then we have a flow, and this is just step 1, step 2, but again, it has to rise in action. And then there's an impediment. Something could get in the way. It's our job to make sure that things do not get in the way so that people ultimately meet their goals and accomplish what they need to do using the things that we build. The impediments, however, could be things like sign up. You might require sign up. And what you start seeing when you start digging into analytics, hey, X% drop off at this step. What's going on? It could be you require payment, and that's something else that you can find data and analytics for. Oh no, it's too expensive, and then you start doing some research studies, finding out, okay, what should this cost, or what happened here? Sometimes it's a usability issue, like I've worked on projects where, we didn't have a certificate on that payment screen, and people didn't trust the system, and then they dropped off, and you add a little symbol, and great, done. So funnel drop off. So when you look at web analytics, what you see is a story, essentially. You see plot points that are measured and that you can extrapolate meaning from and figure out what is the user trying to do and why are they accomplishing it or not accomplishing it. It could be mental hurdles. So this is when you start getting into data collection. And when you're looking at stories like this, without having actual data, you can make assumptions and hypotheses, which is a great first step. So you might wonder, are people getting bored here or something else? Are they afraid? It could be something that's just in their head. They could be lacking value. That's often when flows and funnels don't function in a way that meet business goals and metrics and KPIs. Oftentimes there's a lack of value, lack of perceived value in people actually using this thing. And it could be, again, just good old usability issues. There might just be, I got confused, or I didn't understand, or the button, where's the button, where's the button? A whole host of other things. So these are impediments that you can see by collecting data either observationally, by observing people engaging with and using your products. You can collect them by doing in-person research and just having qualitative interviews and discussions with people and finding out what's going on. And these are also data points that you can get from raw data and analytics as you see, okay, X% drop off or any host of other numbers. What you've also got then at the climax here, so that value that was promised earlier on in that conceptual model of the iPhone, this is when you use that iPhone, you have to experience the value that was promised, and you have to solve whatever problem arises at the beginning of this little journey. Then you just have to finish the flow. And in film school, then another thing that we learned that I forgot a million times, unfortunately, is this concept of wrapping it up. So once you get to the high point, you get to the end, great, wonderful, the hero does what they need to do, wrap it up. End this as quickly as possible, bring people to a close, credits, done. We don't need to drag it out. And at the end, you still need that goal met, otherwise it's a cliffhanger. And so whatever task people set out to do in this journey, in this flow, they have to still meet that goal and have that accomplished. Otherwise, this whole thing ended up being pointless that they did. So what also matters about this goal, so again, it's emotional, but this is when we start getting into goal-oriented measurability from a business analytics standpoint, which is the goal that's met at the end of this type of journey. It's something that's measurable. And whether it's something like awareness, activation, conversion, revenue, sales, like any kind of metric or KPI that matters to you or your business that you can directly measure in a flow like this, you have to measure it. Otherwise, the story is a creative endeavor, and creative endeavors aren't anything that push businesses forward. We're not in the, we're just not here to be creative. We're here to actually make tactical decisions that map out into a strategic vision that we're providing whoever we work with. And this, I know someone mentioned nonprofits earlier. I work with a lot of nonprofits. Even nonprofits have those goals at the end. They still have to, whatever it is, fundraising or awareness. Every organization that puts things out into the world has goals. And luckily, humans and users and customers and community members on the other end have goals, and the two do coincide. I know it's a tension that a lot of us often have when we feel like, well, we as a team want to do this and our business wants to do this, but the two can meet, and mapping it out as a story will help you see how and when the two types of goals can meet and should be measured. So this can be a tiny little story. So this is a flow from an app called Fantastical. And I have a ton of like case studies and analyses in my book as well, some on my website. But so it might be something that's like a tiny little animation that has a story arc, a story that takes place over a series of sometimes milliseconds, but possibly seconds. And it could be something that's more long-term and a big picture journey. So if you think about the iPhone, a journey might start when you see an ad at the Super Bowl, and then you go to the Apple Store and you check out the phone, or if you're like me, you go to the Apple Store about 5 times over the period of a year, and each time you're like, oh, I don't want to spend more money on this thing, and you keep going. So these stories can vary in length, and they can vary in quirkiness. It might then continue onward as you end up unboxing the phone and checking it out, and then it might continue as you start using the phone, and then it actually has to deliver on all that magic and value that they proposed. And then it might, and it should ideally continue as it would expand to word of mouth. So a lot of these stories that happen, they're things that we can track. They're not always things that we can control. Ideally, if you work on a consumer-driven product, you want people to sell it to their friends. You can measure the impact of that in a lot of ways. You can get qualitative data, maybe survey data. And you can find out, are people recommending this? But this isn't something that you can control per se, because it's ultimately the story of the product, the value that it promises and the value that it delivers that people end up echoing. The remote control I'm using tonight, a colleague of mine made me get it a few weeks ago, because he was like, oh my God, you could do all this stuff with it. And testing it out for the first time tonight. We'll see. I'll see what I think about it in the morning, but this is how we end up these days, for consumer products at least, deciding to buy things. We're not necessarily seeing advertisements and watching things or reading the newspaper and getting advertisements that way. So what we have here, though, is this is a big journey, and that's a story arc, but each of these stories ends up, like, they each have their own arcs. And they're little mini arcs that you have to plan for as well. The in-store experience, that's meticulously planned, and that's a story. It's many, many, many stories. And so everything is a story. And ideally, you'd want the story to go on and on and not just be self-contained. And so, again, it can get really, really big. Stories can last minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, even years. I've worked with projects with businesses where we're trying to figure out over a period of, for example, 7 years, why at year 5 are people disengaging and dropping out and not continuing with the service? How do we get them to get over that hurdle and come back? And that's a story. It's a story that you can uncover through hypothesis-driven story generation. We can guess. We can be all creative in a boardroom and say, all right, what do we think happened? Okay. And it can be a story that's data-driven, where you go out and you actually go talk to these customers and find out why on year 5 do they drop like flies. Now, what matters, no matter how big or small these stories are, is that the key here is engagement. All right, so if you want to engage an audience with something that you're putting out into the world, you have to have a story, the foundation. Now, the story is something that humans, your people on the other end, whether they're internal stakeholders, clients, or users, everyone's computing this story with or without you. So you may as well have a hand in making sure the story is as successful as it can be. And why story, though? It's a question that you need to ask, because I could be here today talking to you about gamification. I could be saying, everything's a game, and games are data-driven, and they should be measured every step of the way, because that's all true, actually. The thing about something like game design is games are story-driven. Game designers know that everything is a narrative, and they use the same architecture to architect the experience of how then the mechanics of how games work. So it all comes back to narrative, essentially. Now, why? Well, what neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists tell us, because they've studied this a lot for many years, is that, I just want you to think about this for a second, which is there's no such thing as an actual experience. So all we have are moments in time, and time is fleeting. So that moment from a moment ago, it's already gone. And now I'm in a new moment, but that's already gone. And I could try to catch up, but I'm only in this moment, but that's already gone. So what our brains have developed is this capacity to make meaning of this lack of time. And so what story does is it gives our brain an architecture to understand what just happened. So this is called real-time narrative parsing. And to project onto the future what will happen. So with all the data that we have so far, if I take this action, maybe I will get to do that, or this will happen. And so a story gives meaning to everything. It's the most powerful tool, again, our brain has to understand the world around us. Now, what scientists also tell us is that when our brains consume story, they're activated. And we're more likely to see the utility in using something or doing something, more likely to think of something as being usable. The idea here is that that narrative arc, there's a concept in psychology called the peak-end rule, which is that we remember the highs of an experience, and we remember the lows of an experience, and we remember what came closest to the end of an experience. So if what came closest to the end is a high point, that is what we remember, especially if it was valuable and we received some kind of value that was promised to us. And so I've worked on a lot of products with companies where there are some usability quirks, or we might have a new product that we're launching and it has some bugs and usability issues, and we're all freaking out thinking, oh my God, we can't launch and we have to delay things a few weeks. But when you go out and test things with users, and you do have to test this, what I've seen time and time again is that usability issues that feel like a total deal breaker don't matter to people when they have that story architecture intact. When something that not ideal happens early on and it's a little quirky, as long as they have that high point. One example, I've done a lot of work with Seamless, the food delivery. Only in New York can I talk about Seamless. No one else knows what it is. Seamless food delivery, restaurant delivery, and they're. I don't know, how many of you, actually, I'm just curious, have like not gotten your dinner one night ordering? Okay, I mean, I've seen a handful of hands. For a business to have a random set of people, a handful of people didn't get their dinner one night, that's absolutely terrible. Yet, in terms of brand lovability, people still love Seamless. I used to think it was very strange, and then, once I dug in deeper, I realized, well, that narrative arc is intact. That high point, when you get fed finally, or if in their case the customer service team often jumps in, if something really goes wrong, then they pick up the slack, and their customer service team is incredible. Actually, the tech team and the product team had to do rotations on customer service and do phones, because we had to understand how the story was driven by the entire organization, not just the product team or the design team. But the usability quirks, it was insignificant when the big picture story was still intact. Again, this is something you can test. You have to test. It's not a leap of faith. You can't launch with critical critical bugs. But again, that's when you have to remember that goal acquisition at the end. So what else happens? Desirability. When story is at the foundation of something, and when we experience or are going to experience something that has a story at the foundation, scientists tell us that something appears more desirable. We're going to be more likely to want to experience something. Also, we're going to be more likely to experience the value in using something. And this comes back down to that peak-end rule again, the idea that if we solve a problem in a valuable way near the end of any particular journey or flow, we're going to remember it. And if it's a high point also, that y-axis, we're going to really remember it. And that's when we jump on and tell other people, recommend things. And this fits into what scientists study about choice, which is we're going to be more likely to not just want to choose to experience something, but to want to experience it over and over and over again. So what I want to talk to you about, and I also want to open this up for discussion in a moment, is different ways to find your story from a data perspective. Because I was about to say, the best stories are data-driven. All stories are data-driven, unless you have data to support the story. It's just a hypothesis, and that's fine. But then you still have to test it, so it's still data-driven ultimately. So how do you find your stories? Well, you can look. So if you use something like a web analytics tool and you're looking at funnels, those are stories, those cliffhangers. There's a reason why people are dropping off. If you analyze different steps, and it could be web analytics, it could be any kind of business analytics that you're using, what you see is, okay, something is going on, and you assess it and analyze it as a story, not just data, and not just data sets and numbers. You can listen for stories. So qualitative in-person research and interviews, you're not just doing user research, you're uncovering stories. Those plot points that I've talked to you about so far, that is how you should be organizing your research questionnaires before you go out and talk to people. You are gathering data and plot points. You're finding out, beginning, what's their current state, what do they need to accomplish, what problems do they face, onward and onward and onward. And these are questions that you can write out ahead of time, and it's something that you adapt, like all questionnaires, as you talk to people and do more research. Now, once you've gathered qualitative data, what I do is I work with teams to map it out, ideally on a wall, but you can also do this remotely. I mentioned a couple of tools in my book. You can do this, you can do this alone. Ideally, you're doing it with other people, especially teammates or anyone who you need to influence, especially executives. I often have executives in on these mapping sessions, and that's when you get them to think that something was their idea, and then they get really excited about this thing that you're working on. You have to keep the mapping sessions not too complex, though, because executives don't have an attention span. And they're very busy, so they might be on their iPhone anyway. But so what you do is if you do any kind of user research in your work, you probably have ways that you already take all of your data and collate it, and then you might have an affinity map or put it in a spreadsheet. Whatever you do, keep doing it. The idea is you want to assess it from a narrative perspective and figure out that architecture. So what I like doing is taking Post-it notes with teams, and all of the data points that we gathered, we put them all up. In this case, it could be research participant 1, participant 2, participant 3, and we might have several rows, and we can easily see what the story is when we kind of throw it all out and externalize it on a wall. You can be more haphazard, and you can just have a creative session with people where we just go at it and think, what's the story? And like I was saying earlier, you can have hypothesis sessions and lay out all your assumptions and figure out, okay, well, we don't have time to actually gather data. What do we think the story is? And that's totally cool, as long as you go out and test it right away, because chances are, as I've seen, when you're just throwing out hypotheses, you're probably wrong. but it's great because it means that you're going to be that much closer to going out and collecting real data from real people, and whatever it takes. Some people need to start building right away. Some people want to plan out meticulously first. So again, there's no right or wrong way to find your story. Now, once you have an idea of what your story is, even if you went out and did real research and have a data-driven story, you still have to go test it. So a lot of this is, it's nothing new. This ideally is are all things that you're already doing in your work. And so story development, it fits into any part of a typical user experience design process, product management process, whatever kind of business process, especially for tech companies who are very, very familiar with this. So this also fits into non-tech work as well. But so if you're, in an ideation phase and you've got branching exploration going on, you're coming up with all the things that we can do, stories drive that. And then once you're getting into incremental refinement and prototyping and testing your ideas and really, really poking holes in everything, stories have a part in that. And so you can test your stories by using storyboards. This is a storyboard from North by Northwest. Hitchcock was a meticulous storyboarder. The filmmakers storyboard everything that goes into a film ahead of time because it's really expensive to shoot movies, and so you want to make sure that everything's intact. The last thing you want is, I unfortunately learned this the hard way too in film school, the last thing you want is to take a crew out to a location and then realize you can't shoot there, and then you have a truckload of equipment and 20 people, and it really sucks. So you plan it out. But the idea here is that you want to make sure that that narrative architecture is there. So you sketch the scenes also for engagement to make sure that, okay, the impact that we want, yes, we see this working this way, this feels good to us. So this kind of testing is often like a gut check or something more emotional. Although it's something you can also test with your users. You can put storyboards in front of people and have that spark conversations. You can also have basically test ideas if you're working on something that's interface driven, and you print mock-ups or wireframes out, and you ideally start rearranging them. You could do it on a table or on a wall. And this is another way to gut check the story. The story that you might have mapped out, once you actually start prototyping it, it's going to evolve, and that's totally, totally okay. Again, what matters is you get the story right. So the story, if you're visualizing in this way, you just want to make sure that all those plot points are intact. Does this make sense? Yes, great. Now, what you can start getting to at this point also is more in-depth usability testing and prototype testing. So this is a project I worked on where we ended up coming up with a flow that we had the high point. This is a learning app, and we wanted people to learn something as the climax. And in the end, when we actually tested this, we had the same thing people said over and over again, which was, oh, I didn't know that. And so it was an affirmation, that falling action we just heard from people over and over again as they interacted with this prototype, that we were able to measure they are doing what we want them to do. But not only that, we had other key metrics with this prototype where we saw previously with an earlier version of what was live with this product, the business was it was a video-driven learning platform, and people were watching on average at most one video ever, and never watching another video ever again. And so the business was really struggling to figure out, how do we it's a learning app that plays videos, like how do we get people to watch more videos? And so when we tested the prototype based on this story as a hypothesis that came from actual user research, that we didn't make the story up, but when we tested this prototype, what we found is that in each testing session, people on average watched 11 videos, and they kept going. So without actually launching the product, we were able to get real data that supported this narrative architecture that we were pretty sure was going to work, but we had to really be sure would work. Now, why this flow and this type of prototype matters is that it was a really long, there were the couple of the key flows here were really, really, really long. And there is a rule of thumb when you're coming up with an interface that you want to keep it, we have words like frictionless or just short, or like as few steps as possible, no more than 3 steps for this or that. And the thing about stories and story development, once you get into it, is friction is good. It's built on friction. I don't mean bad friction. We're not creating bad conflict for our users. But friction, again, think about brain science. That's how our brains operate. We're grasping for things that are going to engage us. And so what we found when we tested out a simpler flow that had only a few steps is that there was a huge cliffhanger. People were just dropping off. And so what we ended up, after a lot of refining and testing over and over an iteration, came up with a flow that was a lot longer. But once we ended up actually launching this, so in-person usability and concept testing, we were getting those data and metrics that I was talking about, those data points that told us we were on the right path. In the end, the actual live product that was launched doubled engagement. So that was the KPI for the business that quarter. And what was cool, this wasn't the key metric, but we got 10 times as many paying customers who signed up to use this service and then eventually paid to use it. And so these were all things that we measured, but they're all things that we thought would happen based on the story, because that story came from actual users, and it was, again, data-driven. And so when you're looking at testing stories, the idea is you want to assess cliffhangers, find them, and help people overcome the cliffhangers. Now, something, I know this is a question that comes up a lot with people, and data is, this idea of like, how do we present data? And so everything I've been telling you so far, the story is something that goes into your product, and it's also going to go into how you're presenting the data and making it more compelling to everyone you work with, whether they're your colleagues or clients or executives, investors, anyone. Because the thing about data is data without a story are just a bunch of numbers. And so next time you work on anything, I want you to ask, not what is our data collection tool or what is our KPI. I mean, these are all important questions. What are metrics and what do we need to measure? But I want you to first and foremost always ask, what is the story? Who is our user, our hero? What is their big goal? How are we going to help them accomplish their goal? And how are we going to measure the success of the story? Most importantly, how are we going to make things go boom for people on the other end? And possibly, if things go really well, you might want to ask how it's going to continue on and the story might never end. So if you would like to learn more, and I do want to open this up for questions and a discussion as well, but if you would like to learn more, my new book, The User's Journey, you can, I'm going to send you the discount code so everyone can grab 20% off if you buy it from Rosenfeld Media. The link is all on my website. I'll also post the slides online. I'll make sure everything's there for you. But also that copy is floating around so you can all look at it. Otherwise, I wanted to open this up for questions and thoughts.
Okay, I may have missed something. It might be a really simple question, but when you talk about the narrative and the story, and you've got each, like those items you were showing at the bottom, are those specific user actions you want people to take? Like what comprises the story? I wasn't clear on it.
That's a good question. So all the things that happen in a journey, those are all things that you want people to do or that people are doing.
So when you were saying that you had too few, if it was stories, that were too few actions that your users were taking, and therefore
Yes. Yeah, so in that case, the app that I was showing where we realized that more steps were more engaging, what we found is getting people to do more things got them to eventually see the value. And that's where, that's why game designers use narrative architecture to build a level in a game. They know that if you right away had the hardest thing happen at the beginning, you wouldn't know how to slay the dragon. You have to learn, first here's a sword, then here's a this, then oh, there's a gem, and it builds, and it builds. What this also helped us do though was we rearranged things a lot. And so because we were in prototype stage, we were able to realize, oh, step 1, or step 2, no, that has to go at step 8. Like we can't ask for personal information, for example, too early. That's where it's not like a game, it's like dating, you know, like it's not inappropriate. And so you need to kind of build a story that way. So it's, it could be screens, it could be steps in the journey, it could be things we want people to do, it could be things that they are doing and that we are observing.
How do you, one of our challenges is we've got a load of feature stories that everyone looks at and they're like, they're all kind of as important as each other. So prioritizing is a real challenge between those stories. Any hints you could give if we use that approach?
Yes, that's a great question. So the question is prioritizing. What do you do if you're coming up with, let's say, a big story and you have lots of little stories and everything is great and we want to build everything yesterday and everyone's got an opinion. And so this is in the book as well, which is I teach teams how to use story as a strategic planning tool where you can assess strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in looking at a journey, whether it's small, it could be a little flow, or it could be like a 7-year journey like I was talking about. And what you find is if you map out all of the features that, well, one, story development, what I first have people do is we use it as a brainstorming tool. So we think of all the things that could support a story and make something happen for the user. And, or if we already have features in a backlog, we'll put them up there as well. Each one goes on a Post-it note. And we put each feature or functionality or piece of content and the place in the timeline where it's going to happen. So this is time-based at this point. And what we do is once we've got all of the features and functionality within scope that we want, and everything looks like a great idea, then we put it into a spreadsheet and do a feature prioritization where you start ranking things by points. So by business priority, by user priority, and if you have different user types, if you use personas at your company, then you can, if you have 3 personas, let's say, they each get point rankings. And I do this in a spreadsheet. I project it on a wall to make sure that it's like, you know, out there and everyone can see it. But we do it in a spreadsheet because then you could do quick math and you can reprioritize and do like multiplication as you see, oh, nobody wants this feature, and great, goes immediately down to the bottom. But the great thing also about mapping features out on a narrative arc is that you have a third, so user priority, business priority, and then a third factor that you can put in the equation, which is stage in the journey. So if it's something that happens early on in the journey, then it takes higher priority. If it's something that happens later on in the journey, it could, depending on the context, it could be a lower priority, and then we give it a lower point ranking. But also if it's something that happens at the climax moment, that gets a higher priority. So you assess it for narrative impact. And that adds an extra factor into feature prioritizations that I used to find, I was a product manager myself for a while, and I found missing when we were prioritizing, and everything was a good idea. And so this, yeah, that's the best way. It's like adding that extra factor into the computation that you might already be doing with your team.
Okay. Thank you. You mentioned earlier about the idea of aligning different seemingly contradictory goals through a narrative arc, but I wonder if you could speak to an example where it seems like there are maybe two users that have contradictory stories, and how you can use narrative to try to overlap or create more unity between those?
Yes, that is a great question. So what do you do when, one, you have conflicting goals, or you might have different user types with just completely different stories? And so the best way to think about that is, so essentially, the way to look at it, and there are diagrams in the book. I'm a very visual person, so I actually worked with an illustrator, and she drew what I was talking about. So I think it's probably in the last page. This is a good last question. The last page in the book, I think, has this diagram, and so or the last few pages. But the idea is that systems are complex. So flowcharts, for example, a lot of us use flowcharts to communicate how a system should work. And flowcharts are branching, and you go here, if this, then that happens, and they can account for a lot of complexity. Systems are complex, but humans are very simple, and we're linear. We only have linearity. We have no ability to go back in time, yet, unfortunately. Maybe someday, I hope so. But actually, I don't hope so. So we are linear, like we're just moving forward. Again, that moment from a moment ago is gone, and we can do nothing else. So we experience everything in a linear fashion. And so using the narrative arc in this linear form, because there are actually a ton of different story diagrams out there. Some are circles, some are like flowers, and they're all wonderful. But I find the narrative arc to be the simplest because it designs for the way that humans actually have to engage with things, which is one after the next. And so what you want to do is, if you have different user types with competing goals, or just different behaviors or different motivations or whatever differentiates your personas or your user types or your profiles, you want to map out stories for each of them. And you want to do it separately. Once you do that, you can sometimes kind of like compose them on top of one another and see where are there similarities, where are they not, where do they overlap, where do they not. And you're going to want to, if you're working on, let's say, a website, for example, where people are going to need to do different things and have different stories, when you prototype or you test what you already have, this is when you're going to assess, okay, this story, can people have this story with a website? Okay, great, and how about this persona? Do they get to have this story on a website? So it might mean that one web page is going to have a few different calls to action for a few different people, and that's okay. And that's where it's important to assess your stories and your personas with your business. So if you work with an organization or a business that says everybody is top priority, then that's when you have a business problem and a story problem. But ideally, you need to have business representatives in on these sessions so that they can say, okay, no, this is not everyone is a top priority. They're the top priority. They get this story. Maybe that means the button's larger for this one user type, and then the secondary button is the secondary story, and you assess that also in a linear fashion. So it seems really simple, but again, everything is linear and everything is a story. So it's a wonderful tool for planning and assessing things. But sometimes it means you have a ton of stories, and that's okay too. Cool. So again, thanks for having me. We'll send out the 20% discount code for everybody. And yeah, thanks for coming. I don't know if you've